Okay, we understand the difference between formative and summative, and we also have seen some examples of what a formative might look like. But now, how do we actually design one of these things from the ground up? So let's take a look. Here's a standard. Okay, we've got the construct a function to model, or excuse me, let's go on to the fourth grade standard. We got recognize that a multi-digit whole number in a multi-digit whole number, a digit in one place represents 10 times what it represents in the place to its right. Now, if you notice over here to the left, I've put that this is actually a conceptual understanding piece. So as we are looking at a standard that we want to design a formative assessment for, we need to think, what level is this at? Is it a conceptual understanding? Is it procedural fluency? And is it application? Because that's going to change the type of assessment question that I write to determine if students have it mastered. I don't want to put a procedure in place to demonstrate conceptual understanding. Okay, and so this one actually right here is, in my opinion, very difficult to actually measure conceptual understanding of, because it too easily breaks down into a procedure. So let's see what we can do. Recognize that in a multi-digit whole number, a digit in one place represents 10 times what it represents in the place to its right. Okay, so how are we going to make a formative assessment for that? Okay, so what I did is I went out and dug into the research on formative assessment, and I came up with a list of things to keep in mind as you're building formative assessments. The first one is, what standard am I trying to help the students learn? And that's what we just did. We just looked at that standard. Okay, so we got that. And then what type of formative assessment am I going to give? Am I going to just have some questioning in class? Is it going to involve giving some feedback to the students immediately? Am I going to allow for some peer assessment for students to kind of work together and see how they go? Is this going to be a self-assessment on the student's part? Okay, and this kind of gets at the idea of who's making the evaluation of content mastery. And at some point, we definitely want students to be able to do that. We want them to self-assess and to be able to look at something and go, you know what, I don't understand this. Because when they can acknowledge that they don't understand something, that's going to help them push forward to understanding. It's much better to know that you don't get it than to foolishly think that you actually do get it when you don't. And so we want students to be able to self-assess at that level. So we might think about that. Okay, if we design a formative assessment, am I going to get information on skill mastery? Now remember, not everything is a skill. Some of it's conceptual understanding, some of it's the application versus that procedural fluency with a skill. But these are just some of the things that came up in the research. Do I get information on the strategy use when performing those skills? So this might be something where if you're thinking about systems of equations, substitution versus elimination, can students choose between those two strategies? And what strategy are they using to move forward into this math? Are they drawing a picture? What modality are they in? Okay, that might be something that would be useful in our formative assessment gathering. Does it provide feedback on attitude, motivation, or experience? Now, this one, in my opinion, is very, very difficult to include. I'm not even sure how to include that one completely into anything other than kind of informal observations. Okay, but the research was pretty clear that they felt like this is one thing that's really lacking in education today, and that if we don't address it, we're never going to get the full spectrum of that. So I'll leave that in your capable hands. This is something that we need to continue to work on and think about how can we include those things as we're gathering formative data. Does the assessment occur in an authentic context? And this is not always going to happen when we're designing a formative assessment. Some of it's just going to be what I call naked math. It's just going to be, hey, do this math. I want to see where you're at with it. But if it can be in an authentic context, that might provide some of that motivation, attitude, and experience piece that we just talked about, and help us get some better data. Can the information be gathered and analyzed in a timely manner? If I can't get this thing back to the kids, I mean, usually within the class period. If not within the class period, then at least the next day. Then it's not worth gathering, because this feedback, they need to have feedback in such a way that they can act on it, okay? That we can act on it as teachers and that they can act on it as students. And if they're not able to do that in a timely manner, then there's no reason to do it, because it's already long gone in their memories. And can you, meaning the teacher, the student, or other stakeholders, act on the information? So that's exactly what we were just talking about. All right, so all of this came up, and there's a little bit more explanation of each of these things in a set of the research stuff that I compiled here, creating formative assessments. And one of the things that I try and tell people is, while there's 2 pages to this document and there's lots of stuff in it, you're never going to include all of these things in a formative assessment. Okay, we're just never going to hit it all. But the more things that we can include, or the things that are going to be useful, then that's what we should include. Okay, so don't feel bad if you're leaving out some of these things. Remember, the main goal is for learning. So whatever we can do for learning, that's what we're going to do. All right, so back to our, let's go back to our standard here. Okay, and so here's our standard, the 4th grade that we were looking at. Recognize that in a multi-digit whole number, a digit in one place represents 10 times what it represents in the other place, or in the place to its right. Okay, so this is a conceptual understanding piece. And to get at the conceptual understanding, okay, first of all, we know what standard we're going after, and we know what level it's at. We know that it's at the conceptual understanding level. But then, how are we going to gather data on this? What sort of activity can we have the students be doing, or writing that we can have students do individually if it's not in a group? How do they discuss it? All these things kind of come into play. If it were me in the 4th grade, which bear in mind I'm an 8th grade teacher, my certification is 6 through 12. But as a 4th grade teacher, what I might do is turn this into a writing question. I might do, and have a secondary part as well. I might have a question that was a little bit procedural in that, okay, you have a 2 in the hundreds place, you have a 2 in the tens place. How many times bigger is the 2 in the hundreds place than the 2 in the tens place? Okay, that type of question, but having it actually spelled out with numbers there. So numbers and arrows. So it's a little bit simpler. And then maybe get at just the basic idea. A digit in one place is how many times bigger than the same digit in a place to its right. So we're getting kind of the procedure of, okay, 10 to 100, well, that's 10 times bigger. Okay, we could also ask questions of, what is, if I've got a 4 in the hundreds place, and a 4 in the tens place, then that, knowing the difference between 400 and 4 tens, so that's again 10 times bigger. So we could work with the actual numbers, but I think it's also got to come down to the a writing question where it's just generalized, where we have students to generalize this fact. Okay, now those questions, those simple questions, don't look much different than a test, right? They don't sound much different than a test. And sometimes that's going to happen. You may just have those things. So what are we going to do? Are we just going to pass out these 3 or 4 questions kind of at the end of class? What do I do with it? Well, we mentioned an exit slip. We mentioned some of these other things, but let me take you through some other tools that you might choose to use here. So let's say you had those questions up on the board, for students to analyze. Here's what's called a radar, and you could have either objectives that you list up here, 1, 2, and 3. So maybe this was, in our case, I might change it to questions instead of objectives. I might say question 1 was the 400 versus the 40, and question 2 was the generalized writing question. Okay, and so then on this radar, the center would represent 0, and then the outer circle would represent 3. So you got 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then at the bottom here we tell you what those mean. 0 means does not meet the standard. 1 means needs some guidance to meet the standard. 2, progressing towards independent standard mastery. And 3, you've got it mastered. You're doing a good job. And so you can see here we've got, 15 students. You can write students' names right here on these lines. Put a student's name right there. You got 15 of them. And then as students are answering those questions, you're just walking around and placing dots or whatever on this graph, where each of these radii that are sticking out here correspond to one of these objectives. So you could name this number 1 over here, number 2, number 3, or however you want to do it, 1, 2, 3, and then give the student a score on those. Now ideally, if we've got 3 objectives that we're looking at, or if we've got 3 questions that we're using to analyze this formative assessment, what I should see is points pushing out, right, to this outer ring here. And then just as a visual, and this is useful for the kids too, as a visual, you can connect their points wherever they're at. So if they've got, let's say that they got a 3 in this objective, but a 2 here. Okay, there's a line, and then I can insert another line. They got a 2 on this objective and only a 1 on this other objective. Then you'll notice that what we get is, no matter how we go, we're going to end up with a triangle because we're looking at 3 objectives. And the goal would be is to increase this triangle to its maximum area, which is going to be the equilateral on here. Okay, so here we can see, most of the students got this. So if you got a quick visual, you say, you know what, all the triangles up at the top, they got objective 1. If that was objective 1, then they got that down. They're doing really good, but all the other corners are kind of scrunched in here a little bit. And so the area that this triangle takes up can be just a quick visual indicator for you. You can say, you know what, we got to work on objective 2 and how to write that out in words, or objective 3, or whatever it happens to be. Now this particular tool with the radar tool is available on my website, and there are, okay, I'm just not going to delete that then. How about that? There's 4 objectives if you wanted to use 4 at a time, maybe if you had 4 questions, or for particular tasks, like if you'll remember the function one, we had 4 different objectives that we were looking for: finding the rate of change, finding the initial value, interpreting in context, and writing an equation for a situation. So those are the 4 objectives for the function one. And so here's one for 4. Then we've also got 5 objectives and 6 objectives if you want. If you prefer, instead of a 0, 1, 2, 3 score, if you prefer a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, then we've also got for you, just a radar with an extra ring on it, so that you can go from 0 to 4 instead of 0 to 3, and then that would be so 0 would mean that you have no skill with this particular objective, even with help. And 1 would mean you have partial skill if you have help. 2 would be you've got some major errors on some simple skills in this objective. 3 would be no major errors on kind of the complex skills that are involved with this. And 4, you can go beyond the skills that are taught. And again, you could change these to say whatever you want, levels from 0 to 4. So you got 5 options there. So if you'd like to use this as a tool as you're designing your formative assessment, you're welcome to download those. Some other ones that are available for you: a modalities checklist. This came from Jenny Winters at the Lake County ROE, and this is just where you can write your students' names here down in the left columns. You can put questions or objectives here, or probably more like questions, and then or representations of a problem or a situation, particular situation. And then in each case, you're going to have students go between all of these different modalities, and then you're going to mark which ones the students can go between. So we've got manipulatives. Can they represent the math situation with manipulatives? Can they draw a picture of it? Can they put a numerical expression to it? Can they write it out in words with written and oral language? Can they express it in a table or a chart? And can they put it into some sort of context in a real world situation? So again, this is hopefully a quick look at how students are doing, that you can say, man, nobody's got the globes circled. Everybody's got all these other ones circled. And if you wanted to, when you download this, if you wanted to fit all of your students, because right now there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spots for students on a single page, probably what I would do is I would delete all of the second column here of these modalities, put more student names in there, and then the same thing with the next one. Okay, more student names, so that way you can get 24 on a page, and actually you could even expand up into these and get a little bit more on a single page. Maybe I'll do that and put that up on the website as well, now that I think about it. That's a good idea. So but then you can fit everybody all on one page and you get a quick visual look at how are they doing changing between these modalities. Now, how is this useful for formative assessment? Well, if they can change between modalities, then we're hopefully sure that they've got some basic level of understanding, probably more advanced level if they can switch between those modalities. Another thing that you've already seen here is the observational checklist. You just record your objectives here. What is it? Are they need instruction? Do they need just more practice but starting to get it, or ready to apply it? Where are they at? And again, you can write students' names and individual comments for them. So this is a way to get some more qualitative feedback as you're kind of walking around the room and monitoring how students are doing. And notice that a lot of these things imply that students are working while you are assessing, which means that we can't take the approach to teaching of I'm going to stand up at the front of the room and talk the whole hour, which I'm doing throughout these whole videos. But instead, I'm going to present some problems for students to be working on, some thoughts for students to go after, and while they're doing that, I can go around and assess and then make changes as we need to as a part of a differentiated instruction. So you're going to have to be able to free yourself up to get out and take a look at these objectives as students work and make some marks here. One last one that some of the elementary school people came up with on our ISBE Math Curriculum Model Committee is this is kind of a self-assessment for students to take a look at, where they write their name, the date, of course, and what assessment is it, what test is this, and then they write their overall score. In order to retake an assessment, students should identify areas of strength and weakness. So then, the teacher can just check, yes, they did that, or no, they didn't. They need to correct the previous assessment. Yes, they did that, or no, they didn't. And they need to somehow demonstrate improved content mastery. So for me, if a student does not do well, especially on a summative assessment, I can take that summative assessment and move it back into a formative assessment. Because if they haven't mastered it, then notice right up here, should the assessment retaken? I'll let students retake any assessment they want as long as they go through this process of identifying their strengths and weaknesses, correcting and demonstrating improved content mastery. So if they do that, then I can retake, and then what was a summative assessment now slides back down into a formative assessment category and is replaced with a new summative assessment. Okay, so we're not penalizing students for not learning at the same rate of other students. So what the students do here is they can write the learning targets, the thing that they're supposed to know, okay, whether it's a conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, or application level learning target. They're going to write those right here. And then you can write question number 1 had to do with this one, question number 2, question number 3. Okay, you can just write your question numbers over here. And in fact, I might suggest having this ready for students. Okay, and then they circle the question numbers that they got right. Okay, so if they got those questions right, they circle those over here. And then what they should be able to do is go, oh man, see all these uncircled ones? They all have to do with learning target number 2. Okay, so I need to go back and study learning target number 2. So look how the students are responding and changing then, okay, through this self-assessment, which is a formative assessment. They can write down, I did very well on this, I need to go back and work on this. So here's the big question, how can you take your learning to the next level? So this is something that I took and tweaked just a little bit from the ISBE Math Curriculum Model elementary crew. So this could be another thing you could use for formative assessments. Okay, so back to our our 4th grade standard here. If we came up with 2 to 3 questions, okay, that I wanted to check and see how students are doing, including a writing one, I could go around with my observational checklist or with one of those radars and check how students are doing and have a pretty quick idea of where they're at. Okay. Similarly, I might just do those same questions with a whiteboard and check to see, again, have students hold up the answers on the whiteboards. The only danger there is you get a lot of students who are looking at what other students are answering, but you're still going to get a general idea of where students are at and what sort of instruction changes you need to make coming up into the next day. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is take a look at summative assessments and how those compare to formative assessments.